Walk the clean room floor at a fabrication plant outside Shanghai on an ordinary Tuesday, and the engineering shorthand drifting between workstations, spoken in Mandarin, carries the cadence of Oregon and Hsinchu. The resumes behind those voices list a decade inside Intel's process labs, a stretch on a yield team at the Taiwanese foundry, years inside one of the major American chip design houses. These are not new graduates. They built the better part of their careers inside the very capability the United States has spent the last several years trying to keep out of China's reach. The pull that put those engineers on that floor did not start in a recruitment office in Beijing. It started somewhere quieter. An American visa officer's stamp delayed by months, a security review stretched from 8 weeks to 8 months, a research grant frozen mid-project while a background check ground on with no clear end date. The cause sat inside American institutions. The effect showed up on a factory floor 6,000 miles away. From that single delayed signature runs a chain worth tracing carefully, because the policy built to hold capability inside American walls may have done something closer to the opposite for a real slice of the people who carry that capability in their training and their judgment. 4 or 5 links connect that signature to the engineers now standing in Chinese cleanrooms, and each one carries a different weight of certainty, from documented fact down to argued inference. Start where the dependence began, decades before any export control list existed. China's chip ambitions were built on a labor pool that, for most of the industry's modern history, was trained, credentialed, and seasoned almost entirely outside China itself, largely inside American universities and American or Taiwanese firms. That kind of expertise does not come from a classroom. It comes from years standing inside a working fab absorbing the 1,000 small judgment calls that separate a high-yield production line from a struggling one, and China simply did not have the domestic infrastructure to generate that depth of hands-on experience at scale until very recently. This part of the chain is confirmed, and it shows up plainly in the public record. Pull the leadership biography of nearly any senior Chinese chipmaker today, and the pattern repeats: a doctorate from an American research university, a run of years at Intel or inside a major fabless design house, a stretch at the Taiwanese foundry's advanced node teams, then a return to a mainland company. Trade press tracking executive moves across the global semiconductor industry has documented this pattern for 2 decades. It is not a new story. What changed is the rate at which it accelerated and why. That acceleration traces to the second link, and this one carries the lower certainty grade of reported rather than confirmed because no government or company maintains a clean public tally of it. As the United States expanded export controls on advanced chip technology and tightened visa screening and research security policy, the room these engineers had to operate freely inside American firms, national labs, and universities narrowed in ways that show up consistently across interviews but not in any single comprehensive data set. Engineers of Chinese origin working in sensitive semiconductor roles describe longer security reviews. They describe exclusion from certain restricted projects without a stated reason. They describe slower promotion into roles that touch export-controlled work and a general climate of suspicion that settled in gradually, rather than arriving as one dramatic incident. Some describe colleagues quietly dropped from a project roster overnight. Others describe a grant that simply stopped being funded, with no formal denial and no formal approval, just silence that outlasted the project itself. Multiple outlets covering chip policy and research security have documented these accounts through interviews with affected engineers, immigration lawyers, and university administrators, and the accounts are consistent across independent sourcing even without a single census behind them. No one engineer's story proves a trend. The volume and the consistency of similar stories across years and institutions is what makes this link reportable rather than merely anecdotal. Here is the reporter's read on which link in this chain actually does the work, because it matters, and it is easy to get backward. The export control list itself is not the thing driving engineers to leave. Entity list restrictions slow the movement of equipment, software licenses, and components. They do not, on their own, make a working scientist reconsider where to raise a family or build the next decade of a career. It is the accumulation, the extended background checks stacking on top of frozen research funding, stacking on top of quiet exclusion from sensitive projects, that does that work. And that accumulation is a far slower and stickier thing to undo than a single rule change. Roll back one export control line item, and equipment can flow again within a quarter. Roll back a decade of accumulated wariness sitting inside hiring committees and university tenure boards, and the engineers who already left have, in most cases, already built a new life somewhere else. That brings the chain to its third link, where the narrowing path inside the United States meets a widening one on the other side of the Pacific. Facing rising friction at home and a constrained ceiling on how far a career could climb, a portion of that engineering talent accepted recruitment packages from Chinese fabs, design houses, and state-backed semiconductor ventures, offering senior titles, equity, generous relocation terms, and technical resources that would have taken many more years to reach at their prior career stage. This is reported with consistency across executive search firms, trade press, and company hiring announcements, even though no single body keeps an official running count. Chinese semiconductor employers have visibly added American-credentialed, American-trained engineers to leadership and senior technical roles over the past several years, and recruiters covering the sector describe the pattern as accelerating rather than slowing. Local governments in several Chinese manufacturing hubs have layered incentives directly on top of the company offers: subsidized housing, signing bonuses, fast-tracked household registration, aimed specifically at attracting returning technical talent. That detail matters more than it first appears. It suggests this is not a string of isolated company decisions. It looks closer to coordinated industrial policy meeting individual career math at exactly the right moment. Now the turn, the place where the chain's direction flips against the policy's own intent. A set of restrictions designed to sever China's access to advanced semiconductor capability by limiting tools, licenses, and the operational freedom of trained personnel, instead raise the relative appeal of going home for a meaningful slice of that personnel who weighed a tightening American career against an expanding Chinese one and chose the expanding side. The restriction did not stop this chain at the border. It changed which direction the chain ran. A policy built to keep expertise penned inside American institutions became, for a measurable slice of that expertise, the very reason to walk out the gate and not look back. This is the inferred link in the chain, the argued synthesis rather than an established fact, because no agency or government report has confirmed this redirection as a measured or intended outcome of visa or export policy. What exists is a documented pattern of friction on one side and a separately documented pattern of hiring on the other, and the connection between them is the reporter's read, built from the shape both patterns share, not a citation anyone can point to directly. Picture it the way you'd picture a reservoir held behind a dam built not from one wall but from thousands of individual gates, each one a single engineer's career decision. Tightening the gates upstream, narrowing who gets clearance, who gets funding, who gets trusted with the next sensitive project, does not guarantee the water stays penned inside the reservoir. It can just as easily push that water toward an outlet the dam's builders never intended to open. And once the water finds that outlet and starts running through it, closing the original gates tighter does nothing to bring back what has already drained out. A second judgment belongs right here, before the chain climbs further, because lumping every kind of semiconductor expertise together overstates what this return flow can actually do. China can recruit a veteran lithography engineer all day and still not own a deep ultraviolet lithography machine, because the machine itself remains export-controlled, and the handful of firms capable of building one operate under tight allied coordination that no hiring offer can route around. China can recruit a chip architecture lead or a process integration manager and put that knowledge to immediate use, because architecture know-how and integration discipline travel inside a person's head in notebooks, not inside a shipping container that customs can hold at a port. That distinction is the difference between a talent story and an equipment story, and what's unfolding here is squarely the former, which sets up the final link and the one that puts a hard boundary on everything the chain has built so far. Returning engineers carry process knowledge, architecture experience, and management discipline accumulated over years inside some of the most demanding fabs and design teams in the world, and that knowledge translates into real, near-immediate gains at the design and process integration stage of Chinese chipmaking. What that knowledge cannot do is conjure back the physical tools it once relied on. The deep ultraviolet lithography systems, the specialty chemicals, the metrology equipment, and the years of accumulated yield data baked into a mature production line all remain gated by controls that target hardware directly, not the people who know how to run it. An engineer who spent a decade tuning a process on a machine she no longer has access to can describe exactly what that machine should do. She cannot build an equivalent one from memory in a notebook. This link is reported and well corroborated, confirmed by the explicit scope of export control rules, which target equipment, components, and software rather than personal knowledge, and backed by industry analysts who consistently describe persistent yield gaps and tool access constraints at the leading edge of Chinese fabrication, even as documented talent gains pile up underneath them. A third judgment caps the chain because where this payoff lands matters for how the story should be read going forward. It concentrates at mature and mid-tier process nodes, where experienced hands and accumulated process discipline can compensate for missing or older generation tools, and where Chinese fabs have already shown real documented yield improvement. It thins out fast at the leading edge, where no quantity of returning engineers substitutes for equipment China still cannot legally buy, and where the gap this entire chain is supposed to be closing stays stubbornly wide no matter how senior the talent standing in the cleanroom has become. A handful of points in this chain deserve a plainer warning before any of it gets repeated as settled fact. The hardest number to pin down is also the one most often asserted with false confidence. How many engineers exactly have made this move, and over what stretch of years? Company hiring announcements and executive search reporting capture individual cases cleanly. They do not add up to a verified census, and any precise total floating around commentary on this topic is an estimate dressed up as a count, not a confirmed figure. The link between visa friction and the personal decision to relocate is also softer than it looks in hindsight. Most engineers who make this move cite a mix of compensation, family ties, professional ceiling, and policy pressure together, and untangling which factor actually did the deciding work is not something interview-based reporting can settle with real precision. Visa friction is part of the story here, not the whole of it, and treating it as the sole trigger overstates what the record supports. There is also a quieter gap worth naming. Very little independent on-the-record verification exists for how these engineers describe their own reasons for leaving, since most accounts filter through recruiters, employers, or second-hand trade press sourcing rather than the engineers speaking for themselves. That leaves the human motivation sitting at the center of this whole account more reconstructed than directly reported. Put together, the soft points cluster around scale and attribution rather than direction. The underlying trend looks real and the mechanism behind it is plausible and corroborated across independent reporting, but anyone quoting a precise headcount or claiming the talent flow alone explains a specific Chinese technical milestone is selling more certainty than the public record currently supports. Trace it from the start and the shape holds together without needing any conspiracy to explain it. China leaned on foreign-trained talent for decades because building that depth of expertise domestically takes generations the industry did not have time to wait for. The United States, trying to protect a technological edge it still largely holds, tightened the conditions under which that talent could keep working freely inside American institutions. A portion of that talent, facing a narrowing path on one side of the Pacific and a widening one on the other, took the offers waiting for them, and the policy built to keep capability contained ended up redirecting some of the very people who carry that capability in their training and their judgment, even as the equipment that capability still depends on stayed largely out of reach on a separate track. Nothing here required intent, conspiracy, or anyone acting in bad faith. It required incentives shifting on one side of a border, and people responding to those incentives the way people generally do, taking the better offer, the clearer path, the job where a decade of experience reads as an asset instead of a flag on a background check. The chain does not stop with these engineers either. Every senior hire inside a Chinese fab now trains a cohort of younger engineers who will never have set foot inside an American lab at all, which means the talent this chain delivered home is already reproducing itself on Chinese soil, on a timeline that no visa policy or export rule has any lever to reach. Process knowledge doesn't need a shipping manifest to cross a border. It just needs someone willing to make the trip and a reason good enough to take it. The next cycle of this story will show one of two things. Either the talent gap keeps closing while the equipment gap holds firm, freezing China's gains at the mature and mid-tier edge of the industry, or the accumulated experience now sitting inside Chinese cleanrooms starts training a generation capable of narrowing the equipment gap too, by eventually building the substitutes themselves rather than waiting on export licenses that may never come. Subscribe for the next chain in this beat, trace link by link with the certainty marked at every step.